Dzień dobry, boker tov, good morning, bonjour, buongiorno. Unfortunately there, in other languages, I do not know how to say good morning in your own voices, in your own language. Guten Morgen, yes, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, justice is also a key concept in Lutheran thought. However, when Lutherans hear the word justice, we think of justification by faith and not by works. This was and is considered by many to be the core of the Lutheran credo. And behind this credo stands the insight that God's grace is a gift which is utterly unconditional. In his preface to his Latin writings, Luther describes how he came to this understanding. But I, blameless monk that I was, felt that before God I was a sinner with an extremely troubled conscience. I meditated day and night on those words until at last, by the mercy of God, I paid attention to their context. The justice of God is revealed in it as it is written, the just person lives by faith. I began to understand that in this verse, the justice of God is that by which the just person lives by a gift of God that is by faith. I began to understand that this verse means that the justice of God is revealed through the gospel, but it is a passive justice. God justifies us by faith, as it is written, the just person lives by faith. All at once, I felt that I'd been born again and entered into the paradise itself through the open gates. Immediately, I saw the whole scripture in a different light. That was Luther's discovery, and he developed his theology of justice and justification by reading Paul's letter to the Romans, and subsequently, Lutherans read this Pauline letter with Luther's categories in mind, and the result, unfortunately, was a narrow perspective on the biblical understanding of justice, of the terms of tzedek and tzedakah in the Hebrew Bible, and of dikaiosune in the New Testament. The Jewish-Christian dialogue and also the ecumenical dialogue helped Lutherans to develop a wider and helpful perspective of what justice is. Biblical perspective of justice, tzedek and tzedakah. The root of the Hebrew word of justice appears 524 times in the Bible, thus making it an important term. We find it much more often in the Psalms and in the prophets than in the Torah. Tzedek is an attribute and a form of behavior. It is equally described to God and human beings. Most often in Christian translations, the word is translated as just or justice, a translation that can easily mislead. Popular contemporary conceptions of justice stress the idea that justice entails a form of equal treatment. This is not the focus of the biblical understanding. The focus of the term tzedek is on the relationship to the community and its overall well-being. Furthermore, tzedek is part of the relationship between God and Israel. God's tzedek is mirrored in his giving the Torah to Israel, and Israel's tzedek becomes apparent in fulfilling God's will, that is also the commandments of the Torah. If there is strife and conflict, according to the biblical perspective, there is no tzedek. It needs to be reestablished. Tzedek is also the consequence of human behavior. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, God addresses his people, "Listen to me, you who pursue Tzedek, you who seek the Lord. Truly, God has comforted Zion, comforted all her ruins. Hearken to me, you who care for Tzedek, O people who have my Torah in your heart." It is interesting to note that the different translations that were chosen, Buber and Rosenzweig translate the term Tzedek as Wahrhaftigkeit, veracity. Zunz translates dem Rechte, the law, the first time, and justice, Gerechtigkeit, the second time. The American translation of the Jewish Publication Society translates the first occurrence as justice and the second as the right. The American Revised Standard Version, a Christian translation, rather freely chooses the terms deliverance and righteousness. A contemporary Christian translation from Germany uses Gerechtigkeit, justice twice. When I was studying this, it became apparent that the way the word is translated also mirrors the theological background the translators came from. And I think seeing the different translations is a real compelling reason to study Hebrew. However, all the translations agree on how to translate the term in Deuteronomy 16, verse 18-19, "Justice, justice you shall pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you," the title of our lectures. These words are spoken by Moses on Mount Nebo. They are his testament to the Israelite people who will cross the river Jordan and move into the promised land, whereas Moses knows he'll die and he'll not be able to lead the people. His admonition to pursue justice is part of the literary context in which he instructs the Israelites to establish legal procedures. "You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes. You shall not judge unfairly." Justice needs law, needs a functioning juridical system. A juridical system will most often not suffice to create justice, yet it's a necessary precondition. And for all we know, if law is abrogated, the foundation of a society is undermined. And a drastic example of this is a Nazi inversion of law into injustice. Among the 7 Noahide laws, which a non-Jew has to fulfill to be part of Olam Haba, the coming world, there are 6 negative laws and 1 positive. The positive law demands establishing courts of law. For a long time, I wondered why this commandment was chosen rather than any other biblical prescription. Given the close relationship the Bible posits between justice and law, I recognize that the establishment of courts, or in modern terms, a juridical system, as a necessary precondition for justice. Again and again, in the Bible, prophetic criticism is directed against the abuse of law and the disturbance of tzedakah. Thus, Amos addresses the people, "Ah, you who turn law, mishpat, into wormwood and hurl justice, tzedakah, to the ground." Amos 5:7. From the fact that tzedakah does not exist in the present, the prophets look to the future. Jeremiah says, "See, a time is coming when I will raise up a true branch of David's line. He shall reign as a king and prosper and act according to right and do justice in the land. Oseh mishpat u'tzedakah. And this is the name by which he'll be called. The Lord is our righteousness, tzidkatenu." Jeremiah 23, verse 5. Tzedakah, in this case, is an aspect of political actions of the ruler. His rule creates peace and a peaceful society. In the Christian tradition of exegesis, Jesus was identified with this ruler, and this identification mirrors the hope of his early followers that Jesus, the Galilean from Nazareth, the hoped for Messiah, would create justice. Later on, the concrete political implications were spiritualized and thus neutralized. Justice in the New Testament. The New Testament term dikaiosune should also be understood in line with the Hebrew terms of tzedek and tzedakah. This is particularly evident in the Gospel of Matthew. In his Gospel, dikaiosune is stressed over and over again. Above all, dikaiosune is a practice of justice, the fulfilling of the mitzvot of the Torah. And he says, but first seek his kingdom and his justice, Matthew 6:33. And this admonition to me echoes the verse of Deuteronomy, justice, justice you shall pursue. Yet, this echo has been often rendered inaudible since translations often use the term righteousness rather than justice. And last but not least, for Matthew's understanding of justice, it is necessary to look at his description of Judgment Day. Jesus invites the righteous ones with the words, "Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, for I was hungry and you gave me food. For I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Matthew 25:34-35. Then the righteous ones ask him, when did they do all these things to Jesus, for they do not remember? And Jesus answers, as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. The message is clear. Those who do concrete works of justice will enter into the kingdom of God. The biblical concept of tzedek, tzedakah, opens my eyes for Matthew's understanding of dikaiosune. The exegesis has found a special term to describe this form of justice, justitia connectiva. It means acting in a social and communicative way understood as part of the relationship to God. And now I come to a contemporary example where churches are striving for justice, the conciliar process to justice, peace, and integrity of creation. In 1983, the General Assembly of the World Council in Vancouver stated as its goal to engage member churches in a conciliar process of mutual commitment to justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. The scope was subsequently expanded to other churches which are not members of the World Council, as well as to ecumenical organizations and movements committed to the causes. In putting forth this call, the Assembly was responding to a situation of crisis, stating, "Humanity is now living in the dark shadows of an arms race more intense and of systems of injustice more widespread than the world has ever known. Never before had the human race been as close as it is now to total self-destruction. Never before have so many lived in the grip of deprivation and oppression." The call to work globally as well as locally for justice, peace, and the integrity of creation touched a nerve, and subsequently many initiatives were formed. In 1990, a convocation in Seoul affirmed 10 fundamental convictions. They include that the earth belongs to God, that all human beings are equal regardless of their gender, ethnicity, or social status, justice and human rights are seen as intertwined. The source of human rights, they say, is God's justice, who frees his enslaved and impoverished people from oppression. In the 10 affirmations, there are a number of references made to the biblical understanding of justice. Beside Matthew 25, Deuteronomy, Amos, and Isaiah are quoted, and I can see biblical aspects of tzedek, tzedakah, and dikayus zene have found their way into this ecumenical commitment to justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. I have come upon a study aid from Württemberg, which gives many examples how to integrate the plenty aspects into daily life of a congregations. It tackles concrete questions such as which kind of coffee to use, how energy can be saved, how money is invested, as well as theological questions concerning possibilities of when to preach on these topics during the course of the church year. On a grassroots level, as well as on an institutional level, are a number of activities suggested which contribute to more justice in this world. And in Germany, there are plenty of different activities going on. Working together for justice. Given this short introduction, one may assume that a movement which carries the word justice in its title and which refers in its founding principle more than once to the Hebrew Bible sees Jews as partners in a project striving for peace, justice, and the integrity of creation. And the second European Ecumenical Assembly that convened in Graz in 1997 stated, "We are thankful that discussions has intensified between Christians and churches and Judaism and is giving rise to a new departure in theological teaching and church practice, as a number of recent church documents show. We are also thankful that the number of Jewish congregations is gradually rising again in many countries of Europe, and that Christians again have the chance to live together with Jews and to discover and understand their common heritage. Yet, Jews are not seen as partners in a joint enterprise to pursue justice. And the reasons why Jews have not been identified as partners in the pursuit of justice are multiple, and at this point I'll refrain from speculations. Christians, and especially Lutherans, profit by studying the biblical understanding of tzedek and tzedakah. Furthermore, it is also important to listen to the rabbinical interpretations of tzedakah, which will happen very soon. The Christian, and it seems to me also the Jewish obligation to work for justice, is an obligation towards God, which finds its expression in acting towards one's fellow human beings. Furthermore, the pursuit of justice transcends opinions, values, or good intentions. It does not remain inside our hearts, but it involves our mouths, our hands, and our feet. Acting, rather bearing one's fate, empowers the individual and the community who is no longer passive, but actively engages the world. The pursuit of justice can and should take many forms, and the journey towards justice, I think, begins here. Therefore, I would like to invite you to join me in a small act towards more justice for God's creation. Most of us have taken airplanes to come to this conference. This is harmful for the environment. Planting trees does a little bit to counteract this damage. And therefore, I would like to invite you that we'll plant trees in Israel, that we'll contribute trees to the peace forest which has been established in the name of Pope John Paul II. One tree is about $15 or 10 euros, and whoever would like to come and join in this, I'll be later on waiting there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Rudnick, and for bringing us also to a very practical way to implement the vision you described. I'd now invite Rabbi David Rosen to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you, Phil, Morai Rabbanai, Reverend ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I'm very grateful for the invitation to be able to be with you, especially, of course, to our president, Debbie, and to all the organizers of this wonderful meeting. Especially grateful because it's bringing me back to my family here, and because I have to apologize that because of the very crazy lifestyle I lead, in which I hope I'm helping to tikkun olam, but even if I'm deluding myself, I'm having a lot of fun. Nevertheless, has prevented me from being at the conferences in past years, I think since Jerusalem. So I'm very happy to be back here and to be amongst family, so many friends. I must give special recognition to my Irish family here. And also to, I'm sure this has already been said, but allow me also to welcome John Paul Likovsky, my successor, the past president, congratulating him on a successful, having been through the tribulation successfully, and wish him a very full and complete, speedy recovery. I'm also happy to be here because it's taken me a while to develop an affection for this city, because I suppose most Jews carry a certain amount of baggage with regards to history associated especially with Poland, and not always fair by any means. But this, in fact, is the city of my origins on my mother's side, descending from the Ramo, or as they say here, the Rumu, and from generations of the courts, the rabbinic courts of Cracow. So it's wonderful to be here as well. I'm a little bit ambivalent about the fact that our General Secretary, our extremely admirable General Secretary in his efficiency, required me to have a written text. I normally don't like written texts because I prefer to have more eye contact. But this has been done for the translators, and it is probably a very good way of slowing me down because I have a tendency sometimes to speak too fast. So, again, my appreciation to all, and appreciation to Professor Ursula for her presentation. The Torah presents justice as a defining divine attribute. The God of creation and history is a just God. Indeed, Abraham is portrayed as the father of ethical monotheism, quote, because I have known him that he will instruct his children and his household after him that they keep the way of the Lord to do justice and righteousness. Genesis 18, verse 19. Abraham argues for justice for the righteous individuals within the sinful city of Sodom because he knows, quote, the way of the Lord is justice. Quote, will the judge of the whole world not do justice? Genesis 18, verse 25. But as already mentioned, God's way is not only the way of justice, but also of righteousness, as that verse indicates. Not only of judgment, but also mercy. Throughout the Bible, the use of the term justice is overwhelmingly combined with the words righteousness, mercy, and peace. Mishpat v'tzedek, mishpat tzedakah chesed v'rachamim, mishpat v'shalom, tzedek v'shalom. In the Sabbath afternoon services at this time of the year, we read the chapters of Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. The first chapter concludes with a saying that the world is sustained by three things: emet, mishpat, v'shalom, truth, judgment, and peace. And in support of this dictum, the words of the prophet Zechariah, chapter 8, verse 16 are cited, Emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sha'areichem. Truth and the judgment of peace execute in your gates. However, the sages in the Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 6b, discerned a conflict between these very terms used in the quote. They ask, how is it possible to reconcile judgment with peace, or justice with mercy? If strict justice is ruled, for example, in the case of a dispute, then one in whose favor the judges rule will be content, but the other will feel hard done by and resentful. There may be justice, but there is by no means necessarily peace. In fact, the decision may lead to the very opposite of peace. The very combination of the terms justice and peace, judgment and mercy, indicate that Judaism does not perceive justice as a theoretical abstraction or as simply having the goal of trying to make a point. The purpose of justice is to promote the well-being of human society. And this objective requires a creative tension between justice and peace, between judgment and righteousness. So where do we find the balance between the two? In the above-mentioned Talmudic text, our sages answer that the two are reconciled through pshara, bitzua, compromise. Compromise is accordingly seen as an ethical value, and in Jewish jurisprudence, arbitration is not an extrajudicial procedure, but part of the responsibility of the courts themselves. On the basis of this Talmudic passage, Maimonides rules that at the outset, judges are required to offer the litigants arbitration as the first and preferred path to resolve the dispute. In effect, this means that in this creative tension, peace has the upper hand, preventing the problematic and even possibly immoral situation that when the pursuit of justice fails to take the situations and contexts that persons find themselves into consideration, then it can even be an immoral pursuit. Accordingly, our sages understood the two attributes of God as reflected in the two main biblical names for the deity, the Tetragrammaton and Elohim, to reflect the qualities, the essential divine qualities of justice and mercy, Midat Hadin and Midat Harachamim. However, they highlight their recognition of the aforementioned tension between these very attributes by describing in the Talmud in Tractate Brachot, folio 7a, that the Almighty has his own personal prayer. What is God's prayer? Let my attribute of mercy overcome my attribute of justice, judgment, so that I may deal with my children beyond the strict limits of justice and judgment. Beautiful prayer. For the Hasidic master, Rabbi Bunum of Psishcha, it is in this light that we are to understand the repetitive use of the word justice in Deuteronomy 16, verse 20. Justice, justice shall you pursue. To mean that justice must be pursued in a righteous, just manner. This applies not only to the judge and the individual, but obviously to the judicial system itself. This understanding is the basis of the legitimation of civil disobedience in the Torah, as we see, for example, in the case of the midwives who defy Pharaoh's edict to murder newborn Hebrew baby boys, when the system itself is fundamentally unjust. It was with such examples and teaching that those of us who fought against the apartheid regime in South Africa in the name of Judaism repudiated the argument of those who called for submission to the regime on the basis of the Talmudic injunction, Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law and is binding, which Judaism teaches. This argument is only valid, we stated, on the basis of the aforementioned sources, if the system itself is a just one, but not when it pursues immoral policies, let alone when the system itself is inherently immoral. Closely related to Reb Bunum's interpretation of the reason for the repetition of the word in Deuteronomy 16, verse 20, is the commentary that explains that the reiteration is in order to teach us that justice is actually best advanced for oneself when one pursues it for all. This was one of the central concerns that led Rabbi Bandel and I, together with the late Rabbis David Foreman and Ben Hollander, to found the organization Rabbis for Human Rights in Israel. Not only we were concerned with promoting the fundamental Jewish teaching concerning human rights of all people, all created in a divine image, and especially in a context of conflict, which particularly requires such necessary watchdog activity. But we were also animated by the conviction that human rights is an indivisible concept. Deny them in one place, and the denial will ultimately boomerang destructively upon one's own community and society as a whole. However, Rabbis for Human Rights gives expression to this ethical commitment in the conviction that the different communities in conflict both had and have their just claims and attachments. Indeed, those who try to portray the conflict in the Holy Land as a parallel to apartheid in South Africa not only ignorantly or willfully confuse racial persecution with territorial conflict. In fact, the situation in Israel-Palestine far more resembles the Irish territorial conflict, but play into a zero-sum mentality that presumes that the well-being of one side of the conflict must be to the detriment of the other. The aforementioned understanding that the pursuit of justice for others ultimately serves the pursuit of justice for oneself is of critical importance for us, especially in the Holy Land. Only when we Israelis and Palestinians learn to extricate ourselves from a zero-sum mentality and realize that it is by providing each other with dignity and security will we really promote our own long-term well-being and provide our respective peoples with the brighter future they all yearn for. Part of this process means realizing and accepting that in this conflict, respective calls for absolute justice are incompatible, as indeed in many, if not most, territorial conflicts. Claims for justice accordingly have to be reconciled with peace, which inevitably, as our sages teach, necessitates compromise. Judaism's understanding of the universal importance of justice is reflected in the establishment of an access to courts of justice as one of the 7 Noahide commandments, as Professor Ursula has mentioned, seen as the universally obligatory commandments reflecting the essence of universal morality. However, Judaism does not specify the system or method of governance by which this value is to be implemented. The result is that, perhaps in typical Jewish fashion, there is much diversity in conceptual thinking regarding the ideal political system. Indeed, while the biblical model of monarchy is identified by some medieval luminaries as an ideal, albeit for some only realizable in the Messianic era, others point to the same sources to justify a critical view of monarchism and to extol the ideal of a republic. Similarly, it is not possible to claim that Judaism advocates for one particular economic modus operandi. Of course, the Torah is replete with social economic injunctions, but that is precisely the point. They are injunctions, and while they reflect values, they do not necessarily reflect, let alone advocate, for a particular economic system as such. I referred at the outset of my presentation to the section of the Mishnah known as the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. In chapter 5, Mishnah 10, we are presented with 4 economic typologies. And while it describes individuals, the insights are relevant to certain systems and ideologies as well. I will present them in a different order from the way they appear in the Mishnah for my own purposes in order to emphasize the particular passages I want to. There is one who says, "Mine is mine, and yours is mine." That is a wicked person. There is one that says, yours is yours, and mine is yours. That is a saintly person. One who says, mine is yours, and yours is mine, is an ignorant person. And one who says, mine is mine, and yours is yours, this is an average approach, but some say this is the quality of Sodom. The first two of these statements are obvious. The first example, one who says mine is mine and yours is mine, is of an avaricious, egomaniac nature, devoid of restraint, who has no respect for the rights, dignity, and ownership of others. The second, as I presented it, one who says yours is yours and mine is yours, reflects an exceptional altruism, a lack of self-preoccupation, together with concern for the needs of others, that is almost superhuman, and thus cannot serve as a normal model, as admirable as it might be. However, the analysis of the third, as per my order, is interesting. The Mishnah declares that the one who says, yours is mine and mine is yours, is ignorant or foolish, i.e. the proposition that rejects the concept of private property goes against human nature. It may well be a well-intentioned proposition, but it is doomed. And we might add that we have seen that efforts to implement it lead to serious negative moral consequences, as this land has seen under communism. But arguably, the most fascinating position is that which is described initially in the Mishnah as an average or normal approach. This is one who says, mine is mine and yours is yours. Jewish tradition takes the concept of private ownership as something natural and potentially salutary. Aside from anything else, it makes the individual responsible not only for earning his or her living, but also for the way that private property is used, especially for preventing it from harming of others, being responsible for preventing it to harm others. On a more theological plane, the understanding that private wealth is a gift from God places moral responsibilities and obligations upon us in relation to society, and especially the needy, to their benefit. However, the Mishnah tells us that there are those that say that this approach of mine is mine and yours is the quality of Sodom. For when the legitimacy and even desirability of private ownership becomes a tool for social